Karoldrew Pallones, and I'm here to ask you this one question. How do you think perpetuation of life occurs, whether it's organisms or plants? Well, I know some of you guys know the answer already, but for those who don't, I can guarantee you there's a beauty of it. Once you know how this perpetuation of life occurs and what is the significance of it for every one of us, you'll see the beauty of it. And disclaimer already, every information I will disclose to you by now, it is fact-checked and it is coming from trusted researchers and scientists, which there are some coming from a real-life experiment. And going back from what I'm saying earlier, the beauty of perpetuation of life. Of course, we have to know how does it work, or how does it occur from start to beginning. So of course, from start, we have to know how does animals and plants reproduce, and then how they inherit traits, or specifically how does DNA works. And with that DNA coming in, we're now going to proceed with the GMOs, or the genetically modified organisms. And what are the significance of it? Are there risks? And last but not least, how does biotic potential environment and resistance, or environmental resistance rather, can affect the perpetuation of life and its interdependence? So, how are we going to answer or know all of those concepts that I have told you? Well, don't worry. I have this thing, what we call the magical book. In this magical book, it contains every information that we need to answer all of those concepts and to know the beauty of perpetuation of life and its interdependence. So, let's go first from the start. The animal's reproduction and plant's reproduction. Well, to give you a general idea, there are two types of reproduction. The first one is asexual reproduction and the second is sexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, it does only need one parent only, while in sexual reproduction, it does need two parents. Now, moving on to the plant reproduction. For the asexual reproduction, rather, of the plant reproduction, there are two types of it, the natural method and the artificial method. Let's go with natural method first. So, what are the different types of natural method? Now, according to our magical book, there are four types of it. And the first one is budding. And for the next one would be the vegetative propagation. And then the next one would be what we call the fragmentation. And the last but not the least would be the spore formation. And that are the different types of natural method in asexual reproduction of plants. Now let's go with the artificial method. So yes, there's also four types of it. And the first one is what we call cuttings. And then the next one is what we call grafting. And then the next one is what we call the layering. So and last but not least, for the artificial method is what we call the micropropagation. And those are the sexual reproduction of plants. Now let's go with the sexual reproduction. And in a sexual reproduction, it's just simply these two, the stamen and carpel. The stamen, it is the male sex cells, while the carpel is the female sex cells for plants. And those are the production for plants rather. Very sorry for that. Now let's move on with the animals. And for sexual reproduction, you have this thing, this tree. So the first one is binary fission. So it is simply like one organism. Eventually, that one organism will divide into two organisms. And then for the next one is budding. So it is just the same with the plant's budding. The next one is what we call the fragmentation. It is just the same with the plant's reproduction, the fragmentation. And there's one more type of asexual reproduction on animals, and that is parthenogenesis. So parthenogenesis, it is simply where the eggs doesn't need can independently fertilize itself. It is simply like that. And those are the asexual reproduction for animals. Now, for its sexual reproduction, it is simply just like us humans. We have this thing what we call the sperm for the male sex cells, and for the female the or the egg cells. And once they fuse together, or once they meet, fertilization will happen, and then a new offspring will be born. Simple as like that. Now, you may ask, so what's going to happen next with the reproduction? Since once we reproduce, we're going to reproduce an offspring. Now, how do they inherit their parents' genes or traits, let's say? And that is what we call the DNA. That is what we call the DNA, or the deoxyribonucleic acid. It is simply where the parents' genes or traits is being passed on to its offspring. So, as you can see here, this is a DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, and this is what we call the nucleotides, and this is the phosphate backbone. And as you can see, a DNA is a double strand, and its nucleotides are adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. So, now knowing what is DNA, how does it pass genes to its offspring? Now, there are two major steps on transferring genetic information, and those two are what we call transcription and translation. Now, in the process of translation, it is simply the process of making RNA copy of genes, its DNA sequence. So as you can see here, the information stored in DNA is being passed on with a similar molecule called the RNA. And again, in RNA there is no thymine, but rather there is what we call uracil. As you can see here, compared to DNA, two strand, while RNA only has one strand. The one that transfer or carries the information or messages to the cytoplasm, it is called the messenger RNA, or mRNA. Now, after that, now going to proceed with the translation. So in the translation process, it takes place in the cytoplasm, and this is where the mRNA interacts with specialized complex called ribosome. And with that, the mRNA nucleotides with the sequence. Now, there's what we call transfer RNA, or tRNA. It is the one that assembles the protein. And so, usually the protein assembly continues until a ribosome encounter a stop. It is usually a sequence of three nucleotides does not code for any amino acid. That's the process of DNA. Now, you may ask, can we manipulate it or something? Yes, we can absolutely manipulate it. And that's what we call the DNA mutation. Usually, DNA mutation occurs when either due to mistakes when coding a DNA, or there are natural factors such as UV light and cigarette smoke. Those are the natural factors that can affect the DNA mutation. Now, what are the different types of DNA mutation? First one, we have this substitution. In substitution, it is simply a pair of nucleotides is being substituted to another type of nucleotides, as you can see here. The next one would be insertion. So it's simply in the sequence, there is a nucleotide or a base that will be inserted in the sequence. Next one would be the deletion. So in the word itself, in the sequence, there will be some nucleotides that will be deleted. And last but not least, we have inversion. So in the sequence, some pairs or nucleotides pairs or base will be inverted or reversed, and that will cause DNA mutation. And that's how can we manipulate DNAs. We've come in our life that we can actually control it or manufacture it or make something about it that will benefit us. And of course, it is not other than GMOs or genetically modified organisms, or foods, some of you might say. And here are the examples of GMOs. So again, when we say GMOs, or genetically modified organism, it is simply living organisms or foods that are genetic materials has been artificially manipulated in a laboratory through the genetic engineering. And here are the examples of genetically modified foods. Now, with all of these genetically modified foods, organisms, and whatsoever, GMOs have risks but also will benefit us. So what are the benefits of GMOs or foods? So here are the benefits that we can get from it. So first, it can increase the attractiveness to the consumer. Second is increase the nutritional value. So with the mutation or the manipulation of DNA, if it's DNA and nutrition, we can surely increase its nutrition for us consumers. And another one is great. It can give us greater resistance to viruses and other diseases, which could lead to less waste and increased food security. And those are the benefits from it. Now we also have some risk to it, right? For example, it can contribute it rather to development of cancer by raising levels of potentially carcinogenic substances in the body. Like with all of those mutation or all of the substance being put in the foods or organism, it can give us some diseases such as cancer, right? Another one is that resistance to antibiotics, which some GMOs contain, changes that makes them resistant to certain antibiotics. So another risk from it is that certain changes in human DNA and toxicity of body organs. So again, all of those substances, whatever they put in the GMOs or foods, it can surely affect us, our health also. So that's why we have to be mindful all the time whether we are eating these GMOs, and those are all the benefits and risks that we can get from GMOs. Now, since we are done with this, if we are done with GMOs, we can now discuss our interdependence. Again, when we say interdependence, it is usually the dependence of two or more living things to each other. Now there are two factors that affect interdependence. The first one is the biotic potential. Now, when we say biotic potential, it is what urges a population to grow. It is something that will make the population grow even more. It can be attributed to different factors such as survival rate of an offspring, frequency of reproduction, yes, and reproductive lifestyle rather. Now, there is this thing what we call environmental resistance. It is the reciprocal of biotic potential. It restricts the biotic potential of an organism to grow. So it is the one that is stopping the biotic potential to grow. So there are biotic factors such as predators, diseases, competition, and lack of foods. But there are also some abiotic factors to it, such as drought, fire, and flood. Those are the biotic and abiotic factors of it. In light of these facts and concepts, it taught us the beauty of perpetuation of life. Because we now know how animals and plants reproduce and how they inherit traits through the DNA process of transferring genes. Also, how did GMOs come to rise with the DNA mutation, right? And how do we benefit from it? And also, what are the risks for it for us? And last but not least, what are the factors that affect the perpetuation of life and its interdependence? Do you still not see the beauty of it? Here, let me tell you. It is so beautiful how everything that I have discussed is connected to each other. from animal reproduction to factors affecting perpetuation of life. It shows how everything is connected and reliant to each other. Just like us, humans, we are connected in some sort, and that is what makes us go live and enjoy our daily life. Before I end my speech, I want to ask you this question and ask it to yourself. What makes you say the perpetuation of life and its interdependence is beautiful? What are your interpretation to it? Like, how do you say that is beautiful? But until then, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.